Hey, friends, you remember that famous joke, the story of the rabbi that says about how an angel came to his study hall one day and just sat down in front of the rabbi's desk? And the angel says to the rabbi, hey, you've been such a righteous man. They recognize you in heaven. Rabbi, one wish, only one wish you get, and I will make sure it gets fulfilled. The rabbi strokes his white beard for a few moments, and he thinks deeply, and he realizes, here's my chance. My wish. And he says, I wish to have infinite wisdom. A couple of hours later, it's time for this rabbi to give his daily lecture. And the students assemble with belated breath to hear the rabbi's first sentence uttered by this newly crowned wise man, the wisest man in the universe. Slowly, the rabbi strokes his beard and he says, turns out, maybe I just should have asked for the money. Friend, this week's Parsha teaches all about wealth management. This week's Parsha is called Parshas Bo, is one of the most uplifting and exalted portions in the Torah. Because after so much suffering and oppression and Egyptian cruelty, a great big miracle occurs, and the gates to Egypt open wide, and the people emerge through them free at last. But before they go, God turns to Moshe with a startling request, and he says, hey Moshe, I want you to speak to the Jewish people, and I want them to go to the Egyptians, and each man shall borrow from his friend, each woman shall borrow from their friend, silver, gold, all the vessels they can. Say, Egyptians, please loan us all of this. Now God tells Moshe to instruct the Jewish people to ask their former Egyptian masters for a goodbye gift. And the Torah continues that the Jews complied with this commandment, and the Egyptians complied with the Jews' request. And they sent the Jews off from Egypt with an abundance of wealth. This seems a bit bizarre. Think about it. 210 years they're in Egypt. And the Jews are finally on the brink of redemption to get out of this slavery. Why does God consider this such a pressing issue that everything in the big grand plan here of the Exodus is put on hold while the Jews come face to face with those people that abused them for so long and start asking them for presents? What really was the purpose of this raid on Egypt? So the famous commentary Rashi cites a beautiful explanation in the Talmud Brachos that says, God told Moses, I ask you to ask their neighbors for vessels so that the righteous man Abraham, who is their great-great-grandfather, several generations before, he won't say, God fulfilled the promise that he will enslave them, he will oppress them. But he didn't fulfill the promise where he said, when they leave Egypt, when they become free, they will leave with great wealth and great possessions. So in order that Abraham shouldn't say that God didn't keep his word, God told him to do that. In other words, the point is to appease Abraham, to give him no reason to complain about the lack of divine justice, God forbid. Because if you remember, back in the book of Genesis, a couple of hundred years before this portion, there was a covenant between God and Abraham. And God says, Abraham, when your descendants will be enslaved and they will be tormented, he also promised that when they leave Egypt, they will leave as a wealthy people. So therefore, if God wouldn't have sent the Jews collecting from the Egyptian homes, maybe Abraham would have had a claim against God. God forbid. And yet God didn't want for that to happen. That's why he did that. That's what Rashi says. Okay, friends. This explanation seems to elicit more questions than answers. Think about it. First, think about it. Does it really make sense to say that the chief concern here is that Abraham might complain? Surely, if God made a promise that the Jewish people are going to leave Egypt with great wealth, he simply has to honor it because he's God. God is the most trustworthy being, say. He's a faithful God who speaks and does, whose words are all truth and righteousness, as we say in the blessing after the Haftorah on Shabbat. So surely, if God did not send the Jews collecting from the Egyptians, even if Abraham would lower his head and innocently choose to look the other way instead of complaining, would that exempt God from keeping his promise? Come on, friends. And secondly, another good question. Let's say God didn't send the Jews to their neighbors. Let's just say that didn't happen. And let's say Abraham did complain. So what? God could have easily answered Abraham with one word. Savlanut, which means in Hebrew, patience. Rashi, the great commentary, describes in a later verse What happened just 1 week later when the Israelites left Egypt and they stood at the shore of the Red Sea, and we know the sea parted for them, and then it closed on the Egyptians, and they witnessed the drowning and the utter destruction of the entire Egyptian army in the stormy waters. And what does it say right after that? As soon as it was over, Rashi says, the nation plundered the many Egyptian horses and chariots, which were laden with gold and silver and treasures, and they gained an unbelievable wealth just from taking everything that the Egyptians had when they adorned their horses, the gold, the diamond, the silver, and the rubies, etc. And Rashi also says that the spoils at the sea were actually so much greater value than the spoils they received from their neighbors in Egypt. So even if God made that promise, and even if God hadn't made this last-minute request for a frenzied favor from the Egyptians, give us some gifts before we leave, Abraham wouldn't have what to complain about, because when they were the Red Sea and the Egyptians drowned, the Jews became so wealthy just from the Egyptian wealth. So I want to present to you an answer to this question offered by the Rebbe. It's actually in the Likutei Sichos, in the books that are right here on the shelf behind me, in volume 21. And the Rebbe shares a beautiful, insightful approach that gives us something so profound, a glimpse into the concept of self-dignity and the importance of a healthy Jewish life. Just in a few days is on the calendar called Yud Shvat. It's actually the 10th of Shvat, which marks the passing of the previous Rebbe in 1950. And 1 year later, in 1951, the Rebbe took the mantle of leadership. And this is the time when the Chabad 7th generation started. And today we're in Nashville, and all the Chabad houses around the world was part of the Rebbe's vision. And the Rebbe, when he took his mantle of leadership, he encouraged all of his followers, young and old, to share the message that his father-in-law shared, which was a very, very relevant to every person. What did he say? He said like this: when God asked Moses to send the Jewish people to the Egyptian home in search of gold and silver, the issue really wasn't money, but something far more valuable. It was actually about the restoration of Jewish self-respect. Similarly, upon liberation, Abraham wasn't worried about his grandchildren's material bank accounts or their portfolios, how much they had. He was more concerned about their emotional bank accounts. He wanted to ensure that the Jews are going to leave Egypt not as victims with broken backs and frightened of their own shadow, but as victors, upright and proud. The first step to instill such confidence in them was sending them to the Egyptians to look at the Egyptians in the eye and speak up to the man what was rightfully theirs. And when the Egyptians gave in to their requests, the result was profound healing. There's a Talmud, a teaching in the Gemara that tells us that in Sanhedrin, the tractate of Sanhedrin, that says 1,500 years after the Exodus from Egypt, there was upheaval in the Middle East, and there was lightning successes of Alexander the Great. This mighty commander, who just in a few years he conquered the entire Middle East, as well as parts of Asia and as far-reaching as India, he held an international summit in the Middle East, and he convened representatives from all the lands of the region. And the Talmud tells us, to the Jews' shock, the Egyptians' delegates stood up and demanded compensation from the Jewish people. They claimed that before the Jews left Egypt, they wrongfully took their gold and their silver on the false premise that this was like just borrowing it, when in fact, they took it and ran off, and they never returned. That was like going to the ICJ of that time. The Jewish sages were aghast at the accusation and terrified how Alexander might respond to it, and they were at a loss. But friends, then a simple Jew by the name of Gavia ben Psisa, he got up and he asked the sages for permission to reply to the Egyptians. Those were the South Africans of today who go against Israel. The Egyptians did it back then, and he said to them like this: your claim is based on the Torah's account of this week's portion, Parshas Boy, that the Jews came and asked for gold and silver utensils, right? That's what you say, right? But that's not the whole story. Don't forget there was an October 7th back then too. Don't forget that the same Torah that states that you enslaved 600,000 Jews in Egypt for hundreds of years without paying a single penny in compensation. And therefore, sir, our claim Our counterclaim is, we demand payment in full for the wages, for all the Jewish workers, for all the years of slavery, and not a penny less. They were faced with this intolerable argument. The Egyptian delegate made a hasty exit, ending the entire matter. See, Gavia ben Psisa's point was that the Jews were not asking for handouts. And the Jews weren't seeking wealth. They were seeking wages, and wages are paid for two reasons. What are the two reasons people get wages? One, it's a simple function. It's to make it possible for the employees to pay their bills so that the work is worth their while. But the deeper function of a wage is that it gives the employee a sense of value, showing not just the value he gets from the job, but the value that he brings to his employer as an important member of a team who makes valuable contributions to the company's success. And in this sense, the money is far more than a way to buy food. The wages are actually an expression of the employee's value and earned respect. And we look at the business world. The business world is now learning that for many people, the second aspect of wages is probably actually more important than the first. Because today it's not uncommon for someone to leave a job for a new one, and sometimes with less pay, when the original job fails to give that employee the sense of partnership, of worthwhile, of meaning, of contribution, of satisfaction. And today's companies now invest huge sums in employee retention, which focus on creating a sense of home, of family, of worth, of appreciation. In addition to offering employees more autonomy these days over their schedules and lifestyles, we see people work from home. And both of these emphasize the employee's central role in the business and their value added to both the enterprise as itself and to life itself. And friends, this is what it means that Hashem, God told Moshe as the Jewish people were prepared to leave Egypt. Of course, Hashem said, I can fulfill this strict obligation of my promise to the Jewish people by giving them the plunder of the sea. They could have got everything when the Egyptians drowned. If only they bent down at the seashore and helped themselves to all of the riches that were there, they would actually have great possessions in abundance, just the way I promised them and the way I promised Abraham many hundred years ago. But the problem is how their forefather Abraham would take to that. Because amassing wealth by plundering dead bodies is very different than amassing wealth from payment owed, for wages earned. Because the riches at the sea might increase their net worth, but it wouldn't do much to bolster their self-confidence. The self-confidence of a nation that having suffered horrific pain and humiliation, doing menial labor for free in addition to the shedding of the blood of their children. So if Hashem merely offered the Jews the plunder of the sea, you know what would have happened? Abraham, our forefather, he would have protested that even if the body goes free, that alone doesn't really heal the bruises, the scars, the trauma inflicted by Egyptian slavery. And in that state, you just can't go out into a desert for a new healthy life and to be a newborn nation. They say this story about a Hungarian Jew. He actually once shared how when he was a teenager in the Holocaust, he said a Jew's life was worth less than the life of a dog. Because if a dog was run over in the street, people would rush to remove the carcass from the road. But if a Jew was shot by the Nazis, no one even stopped to look. So another Holocaust survivor said that after the war, when he was looking for a wife, a spouse, he actually only wanted to marry someone who was like him, who survived the camp. He said only a woman who went through the horrors of the Holocaust and through the concentration camps would understand the terror, the nightmares, the screaming in the middle of the night. Because healing actually requires more than physical freedom, being a survivor, and it requires more than money to live off. And therefore, Hashem had to do more than just give them money. He had to give them respect. Because only in this way could the Jewish people heal. Only in this way would Abraham, their concerned grandfather, feel comfortable about them starting a new life as a free nation. And the fact that the Egyptians, the oppressors, the enslavers, opened their treasure chests to those that they oppressed, and those that they made work as slaves, changes everything. Because now, the Jew is no longer deemed worthless. Now, he's the epitome of value. So more than pockets being filled, it's souls. More than overflowing wallets, it's overflowing hearts. After such an experience, the Jews could begin to heal. Because the whole transaction restores them the sense that I exist. I matter. I'm just not a speck of dust to be trampled upon at will. I am created by God, and I have a value and a contribution to this world. And this sense of self-worth, says the Rebbe, Abraham was not willing to forego for his grandchildren. It's not about the price tag of slavery. It's about the pricelessness of each and every Jew, each and every individual. And friends, this characteristic actually portrays in Abraham applies so clearly to our Rebbe, who became the leader of the 7th generation of Chabad on the 10th of Shvat in the year 1951. Because the Rebbe invested boundless energy to this very cause, giving people, anybody and everybody, Jews and Gentiles alike, what they really need. Deep down, the sense that they matter, that they have value, that God created them for a special, unique purpose that nobody else in the world can do. They tell the story of a woman watching the Rebbe who would stand every Sunday, give out dollars to thousands of people, $1, another dollar to another person to give charity. And there was many, many thousands of people that came by. And each one got a blessing. And the Rebbe did this every Sunday from 1986 until late 1992. And the Rebbe was by this time already over 90 years old, and a woman couldn't fathom how the Rebbe was able to stand 6 or 7 hours passing a dollar to another person, and moving his hand back and forth, taking it from the pile, giving it to one person, blessing another person, a man, a woman, a child, people from all walks of life. So the woman couldn't contain herself. And she says, Rebbe, how don't you get tired? I mean, try yourself. See how many times you can repeat the same motion, picking something up and giving it to someone, picking up something up and giving it to someone. After a few minutes, you get exhausted. Might even hurt your hand. And that's before you even reach the age of 90. And she says, Rebbe, how do you do it? The Rebbe smiled. The Rebbe says, when you count diamonds, you don't get tired. Because when the Rebbe gave out dollars, more than money, more than giving tzedakah, it was love. The Rebbe gave every human being that came by him the feeling that this is not tiring, but energizing. You are important, and you can make this world a better place. The Rebbe actually explained about a famous Mishnah in the Pirkei Avos that it actually says there's 4 types of people. One person says, what's mine is yours, and what's yours is mine. Another person says, what is mine, and what's yours is yours. It's like a median type of guy. But then there's a guy that says, what's mine is yours, and what's yours is yours. That's called a very pious one. I mean, everything I have is yours. But then there's an evil person that says, what is mine, and what's yours is yours. That's called wicked. 4 types of people. Mine is yours, or yours is mine, or we each keep our thing, etc. And there's a question about the one who says, what's mine is yours, and what's yours is yours. I mean, what does it really mean? I mean, how could anyone, no matter how pious, give everything he has to the poor? I mean, surely piety has no excuse for acting irresponsibly. If I say everything that's mine is yours and yours is yours, how am I going to feed my family? But the Rebbe said something so beautiful about this. He shared this in the summer of 1979. And he said that the Mishnah says that when the Chassid, the pious one, says, what's mine is yours, doesn't mean I'm giving you everything away, because I can't do that. I need to live. But what the sensitive and pious person can do, if he speaks sincerely and earnestly with care, is give the person, or the poor person, the sense that he deserves to have everything. Again, it's not about money. It's not about physical material, but it's about giving the poor person a hope and the sense, yes, you matter. So the pious person says, I value you. I love you. I will give you as much as I can give. And if I can give you more, I'll give you more because you deserve it. Because making someone else feel good is often more important than the action, the money. And the Talmud says in Baba Basra, that Omar Rabbi Yitzchok said, anyone who gives a coin to a poor person receives 6 blessings. Whoever consoles him with words and comfort and encouragement receives 11 blessings. Why? because the latter gives the pauper not only material benefit, but an emotional, psychological, and spiritual benefit. The elevated feeling that the hardship is really temporary, and that poverty doesn't define him, and that a better future awaits him. Friends, this fine distinction applies to many facets of life. Critically, not just in the world, but in our family relationships. Sometimes, God forbid, a child erupts at their parents, gets upset. And you never notice me, the kid can say. You never take interest in me. And the father can't fathom what the child's talking about. After all, he says to the kid, don't I do everything for you? Why is there a disconnect sometimes between parents and children? So I observed actually the explanation for this unfortunately all too common tragedy in the following episode, what actually taught me the most important lesson I've ever learned about parenting. And hopefully, I'm human, to incorporate it to some degree in my own relationship with my children and family, and hopefully it will strike a chord in you. Many years ago, one night, a friend was driving through a neighborhood, a religious Jewish neighborhood, and he noticed a group of teenagers hanging out at the edge of the neighborhood. Just hanging out. It was late at night. It was 1 o'clock in the morning. But here they were. These were just like broken teens. And these young men, they just didn't make it into the yeshiva system. They didn't fit into where people were sitting and learning all day. And they weren't doing too well at home either. So they really had no reason to go home at this late hour. They had nothing to look forward to in the morning. They didn't go to school. They were just hanging out. It was 1 a.m. And something about this situation made my friend who saw the scene stop. And he approached a young boy there. His name was Mendy. And he said, Mendy, why are you out so late at night? And this young boy just shrugged his shoulders. He says, whatever, who cares? So my friend said, Mendy, at least have pity on your father. He gets up early in the morning. He can't fall asleep when he's worrying about who you are. He's not sleeping at night. So Mendy says, my father doesn't love me. You know what? My father would have been happier if I was born into a different family. So my friend was shocked. He says, Mendy, what do you mean he doesn't love you? Look, you're wearing a $200 pair of Nike sneakers. You have a really fancy, expensive shirt on you, a designer shirt. And just a while back, a short few years ago, your father made you a bar mitzvah party that might have costed him, who knows, $100,000 more, who knows? It was a big party the town was talking about. Why do you think your father doesn't love you? Friends, listen what Mendy answered. Open your hearts. Mendy said 2 sentences that shook my friend to the core. Mendy said, my father does all that for himself. When did he ever do anything for me? When did he ever show me that I matter to him? My dear friends, take this lesson to heart. What we call love is not love. What we intend as love is also not necessarily love. Rather, love is that which the recipient perceives as love. Because love is not when parents spend thousands of dollars on installing a fancy game room in a house, or giving their kid the latest gadgets, or throwing a fancy party or bar mitzvah in town, or giving their kid whatever they want. Love is making someone else feel like they belong, that they are worth it, that they matter. Love is making a person feel valued, important. Love is when we show our children, our spouses, our friends, our family, that we feel lucky to have them in our lives. Because the greatest gift that parents can give a child is the understanding that he's the greatest gift they ever got. Put simply, we need to invest in our relationships and communication with our spouse, our children, our family, our parents, community, and everyone else. 2 or 3 times a week, I want to suggest, put away your devices. Put your phones away when you come home. Sit down and chat. Study with your kid for school. The means are less important than the goal. The goal is let your loved one knows they matter. Because at the end of the day, all anyone wants really is to matter. I read a really nice story that really illustrates this about the Rebbe of Vishnitz, a different Hasidic group of people. He was coming home from his services one day. He was a famous man in Israel. And he stops at a local jewelry store. It was really unusual for the rabbi, for this great holy man, to stop at the jewelry, because he usually went straight from the services to his home, and he met people, he helped people, he didn't go shopping. He goes into this local jeweler, The shopkeeper comes out and he says, "Oh, Rabbi, what is it that you need? I can help you." He was so honored for this holy man to come in. And the rabbi says, "I'm looking for a new watch for my wife." The owner showed the shopkeeper all the different types of watches he had in stock. And the rabbi started looking through them, and he says, "You know what? Maybe there's a woman who works here, because I want to make sure that what the watch that I really buy will match the taste of my wife, the Rebbitzin. And I think a woman would do a better job making sure that I pick something suitable for her." So at that moment, the owner, he calls for his wife who's sitting in the office, in the back office. And he says, "Come, can you please come help the rabbi find a watch for his wife?" And she looks through the selection, and suddenly she picks out a watch. She goes, "I think, Rabbi, this will be perfect for your wife's elegant taste and very noble for the Rebbitzin." The rabbi confirmed, yes. He goes, "Wow, this is exactly what I needed." He paid the fee. He left the shop as quickly as he entered it. Now the Rebbe's assistant was beside himself. He couldn't believe it. He goes, "I've been your assistant for so many years, and excuse me for mixing in, but why did you have to go into the shop yourself? I mean, we both know that your wife doesn't even need a new watch. And besides, why should you, the rabbi who's so busy and has so many people coming to you, why should you go to the store when you know you could have invited the owner to come bring you a whole selection of watches to your office, and he would gladly have come and brought the merchandise to show it to you, Rabbi? Why did you do this? This is a bit out of the ordinary." And the rabbi says, "My dear assistant, Gabbai, believe me, I know my wife doesn't need a new watch. But this has nothing to do with a watch." He said, "Last night on the way home from services, I passed by the shop and I heard an argument taking place inside the jewelry shop. And I heard the man say to the wife, 'Why do you insist on coming to the store to help me? You haven't sold anything here in 2 weeks. And all you do here is hover over me. You just stand over me. You might be more productive staying at home.'" And it was really the owner of the store was speaking disrespectful to his wife. And I knew that I had to do something to restore this woman's dignity and remind her of how valuable she is. And remind her husband that he's so lucky that he has her as a wife. And that's why I stopped to get this watch. Friends, I will conclude by reminding you that as we come to celebrate Yud Shvat, the anniversary of the leadership of the Rebbe becoming our Rebbe, and the Rebbe's mission statement on his first gathering, first Farbrengen, he said, is to reach out to every Jew and every human being who has a spark of God, to ignite their soul and remind them of their individual importance, and to remind them of the unique role that God gave them in this universe, of making this world, this world, into a garden for God. So whether you live in Nashville or whether you live anywhere else in the world and you're watching this, remember, we each one have a mission to be a lamplighter, to ignite the soul of our fellow human being. You matter. The world wouldn't be the same without you. You make all the difference. And no one can impact the world the way you can. And when we realize how much we matter and treat others, and as charity begins at home with our spouse and our children, our parents and our family, and we treat them with the knowledge and letting them know how much they matter, we can show God we are ready once and for all, ready to make this world the divine entity, the divine place where his dwelling can be revealed to everybody. And then when that happens, we know that Mashiach will come. It'll be a time of goodness and kindness. All evil will be eradicated. That all the nations of the world will come and see that the name of God is upon them. Friends, let's do our part. Let us fulfill the mission of this seventh generation and merit that the coming of Mashiach will happen speedily in our days. Wishing you all the best and shalom.